Welcome to the Seeking Justice podcast, a podcast dedicated to exploring and spotlighting issues of justice and injustice throughout the world. I'm your host, Benedict Bloggs, a passionate and dedicated social and environmental justice advocate throughout my entire adult life, and now a Barrister-at-Law and international human rights advocate based in Brisbane, Australia. I want to use this platform to give a voice to the voiceless, to interview interesting guests working on important human rights and social justice and environmental issues, and as an independent media mechanism to clarion call forth positive change in our societies and our world. The Seeking Justice podcast crew acknowledge the First Nations peoples of Australia, specifically the Yuggera and Turrbal peoples of Meanjin and Brisbane, the traditional custodians of the lands on which we live and work. We acknowledge that their sovereignty was never ceded. We pay our respects to their ancestors, their descendants, their elders, past, present and emerging, who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global societies. We acknowledge the stories, traditions and living cultures of our First Nations peoples and their contributions and sacrifices towards a better community and a better future. We also acknowledge the need for all of us to reclaim our own indigeneities from the lands from whence we came. Hey there, fellow justice seekers. Welcome to the Seeking Justice podcast, TM. Yes, I got it trademarked because for my sins, I'm incontrovertibly a lawyer. I'm your host, Benedict, aka Benedict Bloggs, Benarama, Benediction, Benabuzz, Benazenabom, Benedict Joseph, the Wonderland Guy Tribe, Three-Eyed Fish, and on goes the list. I apparently have had multiple digital personas, perhaps a symptom of the digital age. I'm a long-time human rights advocate and social justice activist, warrior with an A and an O, and currently a barrister based in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. I'm super excited and somewhat circumspect regarding the long overdue appearance of my ass on a podcast. I've finally somewhat reluctantly decided to start this podcast because many different people over the years have told me, you should start a podcast, after they have heard stories from my somewhat colourful, multi-dimensional life, both pre-law, outlaw, and in-law, and we're not yet post-law, and about the weird, wild, and wonderful cases I've litigated over the years. And then the regular refrain, you should start a podcast. And alas, I have succumbed. I've always had on my bucket list wanting to start a human rights radio show. I even did the training many years ago with the wonderful radical community radio station 4ZZZ, but again, life got too busy. In that regard, my favourite adage is, nature does not rush, yet everything is accomplished, which I would like to think I live by, but which I often forget and then remember when I need to slow down. It's also why I have 4 turtles tattooed on my left bicep, representing my 4 gorgeous kitties, reminding me to slow the hell down, which doesn't often work, probably because I can't see the turtles, and maybe I should have had them tattooed on the inside of my eyelids. Anyways, nature does not rush, yet everything is accomplished, which actually on second thoughts, we might need to critically analyse that phrase as misleading and deceptive conduct by nature, but that's for another episode. My dad also lectured in film and television at Swinburne University in the 1980s, and we grew up with a full recording studio in our house that he built in East Hawthorn in Melbourne, so I've always had an abiding interest in music, recording and media generally. It's also probably why I love recording music projects so much in music studios. I was peripherally involved in the indie media movement in the noughties, the 90s and the noughties, around the anti-corporate globalization movement. Remember the S11 World Economic Forum mass mobilization on September 11, 2000? No, not that September 11, the one the year before. That was in Melbourne, and then, of course, the World Trade Organization mass protests in Sydney in years following, just to name a few. Back in the day, I also helped to establish the Juice Media, which has become known and world famous with the Honest Government ads, the rap news, with my dear friend from high school, Giordano Nanni. I remain their legal advisor, which I've done for the last decade or so. Incidentally, my birthday is 11 September, and so is my younger brother's by 2 years, and my dad and his brother were also born on the same day 3 years apart. Alas, I digress, which you'll have to get used to, as I have a genetic predisposition to tell short story long, which if you meet my dear mum, you'll understand. Plus I get paid to talk, so it is somewhat incorrigible. So I'll have to watch the digressions, but perhaps the adage can be amended to, nature constantly digresses, and yet not everything is said. Perhaps why I regularly attend silent meditation retreats, which no one can actually believe, but I assure you is not fake news, and I welcome fact checkers. Now, I realize there are something like over 3 million podcasts in the world, and every woman, man, child, and dog have purchased a podcast kit from JB Hi-Fi and are streaming more narcissistic detritus into the rabbit hole of online existence. So how will this podcast be different and worth listening to? Well, firstly, a reality check. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll flop completely. The name of the podcast, Seeking Justice, is inspired by the motto of my Catholic high school, which I resolutely hated, incidentally. The school, I mean. The motto, Seek Justice, must have got seared on the insides of my eyelids, and after spending my late teens and 20s being a globally travelling, adventuring outlaw and rat bag, from blockading old-growth forests to breaking into secret American spy bases, cycling across Australia to promote sustainability, I did a diploma in holistic counselling, then reluctantly became a lawyer, and now I am a barrister and international human rights law advocate, having completed my master's at the University of Oxford, where I met my beautiful fiancée, and now we have 2 gorgeous Aussie-Rican kids. My fiancée is from Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, I've got to practice my arms with my Espanol. But before I studied law, as I said, I completed a diploma in holistic counselling, which was inspired by a long trek on the Annapurna Trail during the Civil War in Nepal, which then led to a 7-day vision quest in Death Valley, California, which was in turn inspired by meeting a Native American medicine man in Hobart, Tasmania in the middle of winter, when I was working for the Wilderness Society and trying to avoid being shot dead by angry loggers, but having lots of wonderful conversations with older loggers who knew the industry back in the day when it was sustainable forestry. And all of that happened, or ending up in Tassie after I'd walked across the desert from Roxby Downs uranium mine to Adelaide with a group of Japanese Buddhists from Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and Australian activists on the International Peace Pilgrimage. All of this was inspired by my first degree in history, eco-philosophy, environmental ethics, and ecofeminism at the University of Western Australia and Murdoch University. In another past life, I was also an award-winning slam poet, and I was employed or contracted by the State Library of Queensland to travel around the state and run poetry workshops and slam poetry events. I performed at the Sydney Opera House. I won the tongue-in-cheek Nimbin Performance Poetry World Cup. I used to rap with a 10-piece brass band in Perth and play with a recycled junk percussion group called Junkadelic. I also ran against Peter Dutton at the 2019 election. Are you still listening? Some people say I have ADHD, and they are probably right. However, I have been locked into many other amazing and inspirational podcasts over the past 13 months since the devastating Gaza genocide began, and I've been tuning into the decline of the US empire, US politics generally, because our family is over there, and the rise of the multipolar global system via BRICS and other things. All of these podcasts have been my sanity anchor in the insane gaslighting of the madness of the mainstream media and our crazy governments. I want to give some shout outs to the ones that I love, including Jeremy Scahill and Ryan Grimm at Dropsite News, Amy Goodman, Juan Gonzalez and Nermeen Sheikh at Democracy Now!, always Democracy Now!, the Chris Hedges Report, the legendary Owen Jones at the Owen Jones Podcast, the inimitable Mehdi Hassan at Zateo Media, Judge Napolitano from Judging Freedom, Danny Haifong, Glenn Greenwald at System Update, Kyle Kulinski at Secular Talk, Rania Karlek and Eugene Gear at Breakthrough News, John Elmer, Nora Barrows-Friedman, Ali Abunimah and Asa Winstanley at the Electronic Intifada, the legendary polymath poet, rapper, investigative journalist extraordinaire Low Key at Double Down News, the marvellously erudite Matt Kennard, Professor John Mearsheimer and Professor Jeffrey Sachs, wherever they appear, Abby Martin at the Empire Files, Crystal Ball, Sagar and Ryan Grimm and Amy Jashinsky at Breaking Points and Counterpoints, the wonderful Katie Halper and amazing Aaron Mate at Useful Idiots and the Katie Halper Show, Brianna Joy Gray at Bad Faith, Erin Ryan and Alyssa Mastromonaco at Crooked Media's Hysteria Podcast, the gang at Crooked Media, Pod Save the World, Pod Save America, and so many more excellent podcasts. The brilliant Nish Kumar and Coco Khan on Crooked Media's Pod Save the UK, hence the DIY of my own podcast. Even watching Lex Friedman and Joe Rogan, some propaganda from Piers Morgan, Diary of a CEO, the list goes on. Closer to home, I love watching Michael West Media, my buddies at the Juice Media, Alexa and Alex at Boy Boy, Punters Politics, Friendly Geordies, and so many more. Anyways, even after consuming all that online content, like a desperate dopamine-addicted digital dolt, I still have no idea what I'm doing starting a podcast. So feel free to leave unsolicited feedback in the comments, which I will likely exercise my right to ignore, but fire away anyway. I might also have a regular segment called Unsolicited Podcast Startup because my guest today, the wonderful Eddie Lloyd, told me I wasn't allowed to have a microphone or headphones in the picture. So I'm breaking all the rules currently, but she's not around, so it's all right. So what precisely precipitated this was an old friend and amazing environmental land artist who cycled across Australia with us, Elaine Clockerty, shout outs. She came to visit late last year and we caught up over a coffee for about an hour, distilling a decade of what we'd been up to. And afterwards, she sent me a text linking me to some famous Irish podcaster. And she said something like, "You should start a podcast." God damn it. So once again, I have been dragged kicking and screaming, which is also a very similar story to what happened when I finally succumbed to start studying law after a decade of my intuition telling me to do so and me avoiding it like the plague. Despite the law's many flaws and imperfection, I turned out to absolutely love it, and I still do. It's a love and hate relationship like any dynamic career. So perhaps it's a good omen for this podcast. Perhaps not. I figure I'll give it 12 months or so. If it sucks, it sucks. If it flops, it flops. And I'll just tick it off the list and it can go to die a peaceful life on the trash pile of digital detritus. The concept for the podcast, downloaded to me after meeting with my friend Elaine during a 3-day silent meditation retreat in December 2024 in beautiful Mullaney. One of the aims of this multidimensional podcast, or I should say the aims of this multidimensional podcast, are hope, inspiration, and action for positive change, for which the world is in dire need of, a packed prescription of large and regular doses. And I have always tried to live my life by being in service of something greater and contributing to the world and the community in positive ways. I have a very long list of ideal dream guests and a bunch of ideas for crazy segments. And what I want is a rich mix of politics, philosophy, music, poetry, history, spirituality, all the stuff that keeps me excited, engaged, activated, and devastated about being a human being alive at this wild time on planet Earth. I want to know why the excellent guests I interview do what they do, what and who inspired them to seek justice in their lives and careers, how and why they got to where they are, what they are working on, as well as an artsy-fartsy segment sharing a poem, song, or heck, even an interpretive dance that reflects or inspires their work. And they can actually outsource and subcontract that segment, as you'll see from the wonderful Eddie Lloyd and Gare, our drop-in Welsh folk musician with a song about David McBride. And I should say, if you're wondering what the whiteboard is behind me, it is a publicly sourced, so all publicly available, mind map or brain vomit of the David McBride case, which will be coming up in this episode. In addition to being a barrister, I'm an undercover poet, a former multi-award winning slam poet, which the kids these days tell me used to be cool, no longer, a songwriter, musician, and a music producer. Now that I can broadcast from here, there, or anywhere, like beautiful Byron Bay where I am today with my dear friend, legendary criminal, environmental and social justice lawyer, accredited criminal law specialist extraordinaire, multiple political candidate, city councillor, drug law reformer, and my dear friend from law school, Eddie Lloyd of Lloyd Law. Happy for feedback, suggestions. I'm happy for lovers, haters, polls, moles, or trolls. And by the way, I love trolling trolls. It's a favourite pastime of mine, which you would have seen if you've been watching my LinkedIn feed over the past 15 months. So please step up to the plate and enjoy the feast. And if you like it, please subscribe and like and share to your friends and colleagues, even your enemies. And if you would like to support what we do, please become a Patreon when we get that all set up. Farewell, take care, and see you on the front lines.